history. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you. All of you that are here, it's a great honor for me to be here and to speak on this issue, but particularly to speak on behalf of the people of Camp Liberty, because they're the people that are at risk right now. They're the people whose lives are at stake. We're all here in this beautiful room named for Patrick's uncles and father, and we're safe, and we're going to have a wonderful meal and about to enjoy holidays, and they're in what I described some time ago as a concentration camp. The name Camp Liberty can give you the false impression that this is some kind of a safe, relatively decent accommodation. In fact, it's a horrible concentration camp, very little space, very little heat, very little water, no protection, and it's become a killing field in which Iraqis and people working with them have been able to come in and just slaughter people. So it's both a concentration camp and a killing field, and we don't know when it's going to happen again. So this is a matter of great urgency, not just one of those things that we can put off. You just wonder how we don't learn from history. I mean, you just wonder how is it that, are we stupid? We don't learn from history that if you appease dictators, if you appease authoritarian figures, if you appease people who oppress, that they get worse and worse and worse, and they push for more and more and more. The only way you can convince them to any form of a sensible agreement is by standing up to them, by being willing to stand up to them, not back off or appease or make them feel as if they can take advantage of you. So that brings us to the agreement that was reached a few weeks ago. I believe of a great victory. The sanctions have been hurting. The sanctions have been getting more severe. We got to the point where the sanctions were doing their job of creating leverage, of creating tremendous pressure on the regime in Iran through the people of Iran that something had to be done. Some backing off of the very aggressive positions that were taking had to take place. And pushing for what had been the goal for the last 10 years, 6 UN resolutions. The goal of those resolutions was a non-nuclear Iran. And the thrust of all these resolutions and all this effort was, no, they could not be trusted to have the peaceful use of nuclear power. Now, that shouldn't seem so extraordinary. This is a regime that's killed hundreds of thousands of people. This is a regime that is the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. This is a regime that's lied and lied and lied and lied. So if you could posit a regime that would be the worst regime to be nuclear, it would be the regime in Iran that is driven by out-of-control theocratic insanity and irrationality. So that's why the UN resolutions, the 6 of them, that's why the negotiations and the fighting and the debates and the sanctions of the last 10 years have been in existence, so that Iran would not be able to have nuclear capacity. And so that Iran would not be able to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes, because it couldn't be trusted to use it for peaceful purposes and not convert it into military purposes very, very easily. That's what the debate has been about. So you say, well, why shouldn't Iran have the peaceful use of nuclear power? Well, in addition to the fact that it's an irrational regime that's been very unstable, it also doesn't need it. Why do they need nuclear power? They have untold resources of natural gas and oil. Are we really naive enough? Are we really immature enough? Are we really stupid enough to believe that they need nuclear power for energy? I hope we're not, but I think we might be. This is absurd. This is the reason why we fought this for 10 years, because it is laughable for the Ayatollah or Rouhani or somebody on their behalf to say, oh, we should have the ability to have the power, the ability to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes. They don't need nuclear power for peaceful purposes. They have plenty of energy. They've got plenty of energy to supply themselves and a lot of the rest of the world. And they've been doing it for generations. They need nuclear power for one purpose and one purpose alone: to be a military power in the Middle East. Maybe to assert themselves over Saudi Arabia. Maybe to create a hegemony there that will create Iran, Iraq, who knows who else they can intimidate. That's why they want to become a nuclear power. And I think there's a connection between those negotiations and what we see going on in Camp Liberty, concentration camp Liberty. We've been through this before. We've been through negotiations with Iran before. We have been through appeasing Iran before. Just a little history. Most of you know it, some of you don't. The MEK has had to function under the burden of being described until a year or so ago as a terrorist group. So the Clinton administration, in an effort to ingratiate us to Iran, in an effort, Ambassador, to appease, decided to make MEK a terrorist group, designated as a terrorist group. All of it, of course, had no practical effect. The attempts at reform just faded away immediately. They just continued to kill people, put people in prison, bully, threaten. And then they entered into negotiations with us, and we had inspections and inspectors, and the inspectors were pretty confident that this nuclear program was under control. So how did it get revealed that it wasn't under control? Was it through inspections, like we're going to rely on if we have an agreement now? We're going to rely on inspections, right, to hopefully see if they can keep their word. Well, we did have inspections. The inspections, if we counted on them, would have said Iran was living up to the agreements. No, it was the MEK, their people inside Iran who are doing this at threat to their lives, not just a threat to their lives, many of whom have been killed for doing it, who revealed back in August of 2002 the nuclear sites at Natanz and Iraq. Then in 2005, they revealed the nuclear site in central Iran, the Fordo facility that would allow for enrichment deep into the ground. And then they've also, over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, made many other revelations of a similar nature, which basically undercut the false picture that Rouhani, when he was in charge of this, and that many of the others in the regime have been trying to present, that they were not enriching uranium to the extent that they were. It's because of the MEK revelations, the big ones like Natanz and Iraq and Fordo, and the small ones. It's because of their revelations that I believe that Iran is not today a nuclear power. I don't think it's an accident that these executions, both under Rouhani, the reformer, which are, in terms of the numbers, larger than they've been in some time, and also the attack on Camp Liberty, I don't think it's an accident that this is taking place now. Here's what I believe is happening. Iran wants to have an agreement with the United States that will relieve it of many of the sanctions. They know that that agreement is going to require their allowing inspections of some kind. They now believe it will allow them to peacefully enrich uranium, because the interim agreement says that's what it's contemplating. And I think they're pretty confident that they can do to us, and Rouhani actually has bragged about this in the book that he wrote, they can do to us again what they did to us before, which is allow us to inspect. We'll find nothing because they'll do a good job of hiding what they're doing. And the last time, it wasn't the inspections that outed them. It was the work of the MEK and similarly allied dissidents who revealed this information. And I believe what the regime is doing right now is killing those people in advance to wipe out any kind of back channel that might exist should they reach an agreement. So then they would have the security that there are none or a minimum number of people who are able to reveal their lying and their cheating and what is obviously their intent, which is to get as close to being a nuclear power as possible, a month away, 2 months away, so that any time they want to make a change in strategy, they can make that change in a second. Now, if we can't realize that, if we can't figure that out, who the heck is negotiating for us? I mean, who are these people? Do they have no common sense? No ability to read history? Well, that's all one thing. But here's the most important thing of all. Do they have no honor or morality or decency? Our country has given its word. There are many, many situations in the world where people are in jeopardy of being harmed, hurt, killed, tortured by oppressive regimes. Too many. We would love to address all of them, but we know we can't. But this is very, very different than just another situation in the world where people are in jeopardy of being murdered and slaughtered by oppressive regimes. This is a situation in which that murder and slaughter is taking place at the very time in which we're trying to negotiate an agreement with that government. And it's taking place with people who have signed agreements of protection from the United States of America. Does our word mean anything to this administration? If it does, then they have to redeem that pledge. If it doesn't, then I don't know what America's standing in the world is going to be. I don't know what damage it does to those who rely on us. So I would like to leave you with 4 recommendations. Here's the first one. The United States of America should uphold its commitment that it made, and it should immediately remove every single one of those people that's in jeopardy of being killed, which is every single one of them, that are at Camp Liberty. It should remove them and bring them to the United States. So we should be pushing very, very hard for having them relocated as a group to the United States. Second, any agreement we reach with Iran has to involve an absolute ban on Iran being able to have nuclear power for any purpose. There is no reason for Iran to have nuclear power. They don't need it for energy. They don't need it for any purpose other than for military purposes and for aggressive purposes. And whether it was an oversight or it was deliberate, that contemplation in the original agreement is something that's going to have to be revoked if we want to enter into any kind of an agreement with Iran that allows for the lifting of the sanctions. The final agreement should provide what has always been contemplated in a final agreement for the last 10 years, which is that Iran should be a nuclear-free country. The MEK stands for that. Third, whether we do or we don't reach an agreement with them, we should not accept this regime as a legitimate regime. How can we possibly be in favor of regime change in Egypt, Libya, and Syria, but not in Iran, which has been the most difficult regime for us to deal with, the one who's killed the most Americans, the ones who sponsored the killings of more people than any of those regimes? We have to be consistent and be in favor of regime change, whatever agreement we reach with regard to Iran being a non-nuclear power. And finally, we should recognize a democratic alternative for Iran. Nothing would put more pressure on that regime. To say that we can't negotiate an end to the sanctions and an end to Iran as a nuclear power and also recognize regime change and an alternative really just defies logic, and also defies a historical precedent of what's worked and what's not worked. So we should be in favor of a democratic alternative in Iran. And that democratic alternative certainly is obvious. The MEK and the Constitution of the MEK and the principles that Madam Rajavi has enunciated for the MEK are completely consistent with what we want to see in the Middle East and what we want to see in Iran. And it is not a situation, as we now have worked ourselves into in Syria, where we don't know who to back, and we don't know if we're backing the right people who have the right principles and the right objectives, or we're backing the wrong people who could undermine things the way the Brotherhood undermined things in Egypt. We know who we're backing here. We're backing an organization that believes in democracy, an organization that believes in rights for women, an organization that's run by a woman, an organization that believes in a non-nuclear Iran, an organization that believes in a secular government with protection for the freedom of religion for everyone. So we have an alternative that is a very, very clear one. And to say that that alternative would be a good alternative for Iran would put tremendous pressure on the regime. And what we should be doing is pressuring them, not appeasing them. When the history of this era is written and Iran does become a democratic, free, decent country, which is what its people want, and what it will be, we just don't know when. It's going to be those people who died at Ashraf, those people who died at Liberty, and those people who suffered in both places. It'll be their names that are written on the monuments in Iran, and they will be the heroes, not the thugs and the criminals and the oppressors and the dictators who have now stolen their government from them. So to them I say, God bless you. We will remember you. We will not forget you. A free country and a democracy. Thank you.